One idea. The idea that was born in the head of two students is like a strange feeling. A feeling that is scary and inspiring. Dreams, ideas, ambitions. It all started with the release of the legendary Ultima Underworld. A game that gave birth to many other legendary projects, including Gothic. Today this game is 20 years old. And the time has come to tell you how the history of this revolution began. 1992 year. Ultima Underworld released. The world's first immersive sim RPG with real 3D graphics. Around this time, the story of that very idea begins. When you mention the creators of Gothic, you are probably imagining Mike Hogue, Kai Rosenkrantz, Tom Putski and Stefan Newell. In fact, you should know that the idea for Gothic started with two students who stumbled upon Ultima Underworld in the early 90s and decided to create their own dark RPG. With dungeons, and in the first person. The main idea was an extremely inhospitable and dark atmosphere, and the game had to be quite simple. Without complex role systems. The two students were named Dieter Hildebrandt and Ulf Vollers. Later, in 1995, they already created their own team, which they called Mad Scientists, as well as the first demo of their game, which they then called Finster. I think this story is worthy of a separate video, which I will definitely release. In August 1996, following Finster's approval by Greenwood Entertainment, it was decided to contract the Mad Scientists for a new game, temporarily named Orpheus. Later, Ralph Marchinzik, Bjorn Pankratz and others will join the project. The first design document, created in 1996, was a list of pretty ambitious ideas. Many of them were only partially implemented, and some were not implemented at all. I will also have a separate video about design documents. During this time, Gothic has already passed two stages. The first is Orpheus, and the second is Phoenix. These names were used at various times as a temporary name for an as yet unnamed project. However, the idea to call the game Gothic came pretty soon. Already in 1997, the first prototypes of some locations appeared. Ancient Temple, Orc Caves and Psi Camp. From this point on, the pre-alpha development stage begins. The longest stage of all. In 1998, the first and second demo versions were created. These demos should be covered in a separate video. 1999 year. According to the Young Studio, more than half of their game has already been created. The third demo version is released, 3 more versions of the game were created separately. A certain test version, from which only one screenshot remains, Demo 4, and Demo 5. It is about these versions that we will talk about today. At the end of April 2020, information from a German was published on a Facebook page, who asked to remain anonymous. In this post there were photographs of the collection, which included all the collectible editions of Gothic, Risen, and even a Nord statue that stood in the Piranha Bytes office. However, the most valuable thing that was there was 2 discs with alpha versions of Gothic. These are versions 0.56C and 0.64B. These are Demo 3 and Demo 5 respectively. Phantom 95 and another German noticed this. After some communication, there was an agreement to sell these discs to the Alpha Researchers team, for €1,000 each. Then several people participated in the agreement. Phantom 95 and Psimek. There were also several observers, most of whom belonged to the Alpha Researchers and Nemesis group. Another German named Benjamin helped with this. Troyan contributed the required amount, and upon receipt the discs were resold to another collector for €2,500, with the full consent of all parties to the exchange. Subsequently, the main curators of information in the community learned about the alpha versions. This was a brief history of getting alpha versions. And yes, they really are. And there are many more of them than you think. But well, let's move on to an overview of these alpha versions. And we'll start with Demo 3. This is version 0.56C. There are no splash screens or interface at the beginning. The game begins immediately with the fall of the character from the sky. Note that it was in this version that the legendary 1999 Gothic trailer was filmed. Having started the game, we immediately see that despite the generally the same control, it feels very different. We come to the shadow by the tree. After a dialogue with him, we immediately see an interesting system of dialogues. Instead of lines of dialogue, which the nameless one can say, we see a hand that shows a thumb down and a thumb up. Initially, Gothic planned a simple system of dialogues in which the main character can agree or object to the interlocutor. You can see the full walkthrough of this demo version in additional materials, the link to which is in the tips and in the description. In this version, a new Inside camp was cut out due to the fact that this is just a demo version, which did not imply showing the locations that were not yet completed. There are old versions of worlds in the game files. Most of them, of course, do not have textures. These worlds contain old versions of the locations we know. For example, a new camp that repeats Ralph's concept art. Or Psi camp, where the same thing happens. The old camp is also full of changes, for example, the trading area and approaches to it, a place near the arena itself and the House of the Barons. Of course, it will be difficult to list all the changes. This version also contains old prototypes of monsters. We saw some in screenshots and renders, and some came as a surprise. There is one of the first prototypes of orcs here. This model repeats it in another screenshot. However, the orc has a texture here. The skeleton and zombies have a rather comical texture, which however is temporary. Orcs, however, changed their designs frequently. And that's why we find their concept art the most. Fun fact that the texture of the skeleton's head was preserved until the game was released. It is in a reduced form, present on the texture of the staff of the orc shaman. The scavenger looks completely different. It was created according to an earlier concept. However, this version of the scavenger was used as a prototype for a mole rat model in the future. Shadow Beast has a familiar texture, however due to problems with the sweep, his torso uses the texture of his head. Which looks pretty weird. Overall, the model is quite crude, and it is not surprising that people often confuse this model with the texture of a bear. Snapper is a lurker in the alpha version. According to the early concept, this monster had a completely different look. In the future, the snapper will be converted into a more familiar lurker, and this model will become a prototype for the same snapper, only from the original. The troll also has a temporary texture, but overall, nothing special. The crawler has a green color, and a rather unusual appearance, which is somewhat reminiscent of the crawler from Gothic 3. The goblin still has the old texture from Demo 2. For him, rather comical sounds were used, taken from another game in 1998. The meat bug remains the same. The monsters in this version have some interaction features that should be a feature of the game. Of the implemented mechanics, there are the following: the crawler can be distracted in order to walk past him. To do this, we take a still live meat beetle in our hands and throw it. This will distract the insectoid. Trolls often like to throw themselves like goblins, which makes it very difficult to fight them. However, it was fun. Therefore, in one of the collectible editions of Gothic, there is a figurine of a troll who throws a goblin. If you killed a goblin, you can take his corpse and throw it to the snapper, which I recall was the lurker from the original at that time. This will help distract him. The developers often said that lurkers love to eat goblins. When you kill a zombie, it doesn't die. His head flies off, and then the zombie goes to pick it up. If he puts his head back, you will have to fight him again. You, in turn, can pick up the head and throw it away. Then the zombie will not be able to do anything to you, and you will calmly kill him. Goblins know how to somersault, which complicates the fight with them, and crawlers have poor vision, therefore they are guided by sound. These are the mechanics that were implemented in the demo version. However, not all that was planned. Among the planned mechanics are the following: Shadow Beast are very afraid of light, therefore they do not go out into the sun, and run away from the Nameless One if he uses the light spell. Scavengers can be tamed by throwing an apple at them. Orc hounds were supposed to sit on orc chains that could be torn. And some others. Continuing the mechanic theme, it's worth talking about combat and pumping. In this demo, there are no character stats. Character stats and quest windows have simply not been implemented yet. All that is displayed in the lower left corner. There is your health, mana, strength, agility and psi magic. These skills can be pumped from the Mind Master. For a new level, you are given 1 point for pumping. And you can choose where to spend it. Keep in mind that to level a specific skill, you need a training point, which is given when using this skill. For example, fighting or shooting. In Alpha, there were no plans to add runes, so you could learn a spell, learn sneaking, increase strength, dexterity, mana, health, improve a battle skill, and so on. These are not all the mechanics associated with pumping. There are really a lot of them, and they were very different from the original. Even the seemingly habitual sneaking up had interesting functions. You can see all of them in the clipping content document that Phantom95 contributed. The link will be in the description. The mechanics of the battles were very different from the original. Instead of combos, there were directional strikes. Because of this, the battles were slower, but they were tactful. With zero leveling of weapon possession, the character could simply hit forward, left, right and put a block. It was all about timing accurate punches, and you also needed to know when to block. A little variety in fights added the possibility of rolls, as well as backflips. When pumping weapon possession, the animations changed. They were much faster, making battles easier. And also with the help of the console, you can play the animation of the strike combination. However, this cannot be repeated in the game. Also, using the same console, you can summon helmets that have a texture and are worn on the character. Crossbow, as well as a shield. By that time, shields were no longer relevant, but they remained in the game files. The shooting itself was faster, and more like shooting from Gothic 2, where the arrows could physically interact with the world. A little about minor mechanics. The game had a system for transferring items, as in version 1.01. The enemy, seeing on the ground a weapon that is superior in strength, picks it up. I would like to note that such little things had a positive effect on interaction with the world. Since there were no runes at the time of the game, as I said, spells could be learned. However, there was another way. This is to drink special elixirs, in the creation of which participated the dust from the magic ore. After you drink such an elixir, you can create spells. Also in the game files there are countless interesting weapons that were subsequently cut from the game. In the files of the game, several more interesting locations were encountered. An ancient temple, it is the prototype of the Temple of the Sleeper. One of the first locations in the game, which was the main setting in the first demo. The second location is already straight from Demo 2. It is still not fully known what it was used for. Based on the architecture, it could be a connecting element between the ancient temple and the city of the orcs. However, this is just a hypothesis. The third location is interesting in that it is a mine. It is called simply Dungeon, and at first it was not clear why it was created. However, after studying the level, it became clear that this is a free mine model. From the information pool, for which I will have a separate video, we learn that in a free mine, there should be a passage to the city of orcs, featuring concept art by Ralph. We can compare the entrance to the orc city from the arts, and from this mine. It also definitely can't be an abandoned mine. It's too big, and there isn't a hint of a crawler den. The old mine, too, according to an early idea, did not have deep tunnels. It was a large pit with several passes into the depths. You can also look at additional materials for more detailed analysis of these locations. It is worth saying a few words about multiplayer. Yes, it was still implemented. To enable it, add the net operator to the bot file of the game. When you launch such a world, we find ourselves in the main menu of the game, created for tests. Here you can create your own server. All you need is to connect to the LAN network with a friend, and enter the host IP. It should be borne in mind that the multiplayer in this version is extremely unstable, but it works. It also has strong class binding. Destruction of objects. You could damage almost any object, and with enough damage, you could break that object. In the future, this idea will be developed. Let's move on to the second demo version. It's 0.64b. Upon entering the game, we find ourselves in the main menu. It is made in the form of an animated scripted scene of the camera flying over the Zen location, at the top of which you can see the menu text itself. Many functions are not available here, but they can be enabled in scripts. Quite interesting settings that allow you to switch to the console controller management mode. However, this feature doesn't work at all. There is also a multiplayer menu where you can select a nickname, create a server, and select a class. However, the multiplayer itself has been disabled in this version. After starting a new game, you will appear behind the bridge. Based on the walkthrough file created for the press, we had to pick up the sword, kill the goblin and scavenger, and go to the camp. Unlike the previous version, Demo 5 was created primarily for the press. This version appears in some press reviews. When you press the number keys, the player switches between characters. You need this to go through the demo version, and demonstrate the capabilities of different classes. There are already more perfect textures and clearer class divisions. The monsters have changed a lot too. The goblin changed its texture, approaching in small steps what we see in the final. The game files also contain a black goblin texture that is not used in the game. The crawler texture will remain that way until almost release, but will be changed later. The skeleton also got its modern version of the texture. Lurker has become like himself, the zombies have become very creepy. This texture of the wolf will remain with him until the end of 2000. I note that in the game itself, new NPCs and new monsters have appeared. For example, the first female character who will also evolve in the future. The new monster that has been added is the Orc Hound. Her concept art is quite old, but she found her embodiment only here. Interestingly, there are two versions of this dog in the textures. One with shackles, and the other without them. Perhaps this was an attempt to implement the idea described above. In this version of the game, there are also several worlds. Let's start with the Psi Camp. A separate Zen world, represented by a sect camp mesh, with some objects. A rather crude version, but there are also many unrealized ideas here. For example, a huge tree temple, which has already become a kind of personification of the Alpha Gothic. Columns Laboratory, which was completely carved out in others. The second world is called old_world.zen. There are many differences from the world created for the press. Here we appear near the old camp. Of the global differences, this is a changed placement of some wobs. In the new camp, for some reason the island with the tavern disappeared, some changes in the rest of the world, and also, most interestingly, the Psi Camp. In this world, the Psi Camp has an older prototype than the one we've seen before. And there are really many differences. The general architecture of the camp is the first thing that catches your eye. Immediately after that, the temple is striking, which is in a completely different place. And there are more platforms. Although the swamp itself does not look like itself, even from the description. But this is a topic for a video about an info pool. It is interesting that in this world there are some mechanics that are not in the regular game. For example, here you can destroy wob objects, move them, and there is a mention of the ability to move them. However, the mechanics themselves were already cut at the time of the game. A lot of new weapons, animations, items, and unusual mechanics have been added. In the old version of the world, there are also strange portals in the habitats of magicians. Perhaps they should somehow interact with the teleportation stones, which are in the demo version, but are not used. A lot of cool stuff is still in these demos. However, perhaps the finer details should be covered in a separate analysis? Either way, the great potential for research and the creation of modifications was worth it. Not to mention the story we got. We really saw how this game was created, every little thing that the developers thought about. How they thought and what they dreamed about. I recommend that you visit the Phoenix Tales archive for a long interview with Mike Hogue coming out very soon, as well as a lot of unique content that he donated to our community. The link will be in the description. Thanks a lot for watching. Despite some difficulties in creating this video, it still came out. Not without the help of these people. Unfortunately, I could not tell you about everything, but I will do a lot more content on this topic. See you.